You know that moment when you feel like everything is going according to plan. When you're this close to reaching a milestone that will validate all your hard work. That was me 3 months ago, just weeks away from landing the biggest client bonus of my career. But corporate politics had other plans. If you've ever been blindsided at work, stick around. What happened next changed everything. Hey there! Thanks for clicking on this video. I've been hesitating to share this story, but after everything that's happened, I think it might help someone out there facing a similar situation. Before I dive in, if you find value in what I'm about to share, consider hitting that subscribe button. I'll be posting more content about navigating the corporate world, building client relationships, and yes, sometimes getting sweet revenge when the system fails you. So here's what happened. I was working at Meridian Consulting, one of those mid-sized firms that likes to pretend they're a family, while treating their employees like disposable assets. I'd been there for just over 3 years, consistently exceeding my targets and building a solid reputation with clients. My specialty was in financial technology integration, basically helping companies modernize their payment systems and banking infrastructure. About 8 months ago, I started working with Cross-Stream Financial, a rapidly growing fintech company that was looking to expand their services across Europe. This wasn't just any client. They were positioned to become our biggest account, with a projected annual value of around $2.4 million. And I was the lead consultant who brought them in. My contract at Meridian had a performance clause that included a substantial bonus, 15% of the first year's revenue, for any client I brought in that signed a deal over $2 million. We're talking about a $360,000 bonus, life-changing money for me. I could finally pay off my student loans, put a down payment on a house, maybe even take a proper vacation for the first time in years. I poured everything into this project. 70-hour weeks, constant travel between London, Frankfurt, and Amsterdam, countless late-night calls to accommodate their Asia-Pacific team. I missed my sister's wedding because I was stuck in a conference room in Berlin, hammering out technical specifications. I postponed surgery on my shoulder. Yeah, that's why it looks a bit off in my videos, because I couldn't take the recovery time. I was all in. The Cross-Stream team and I developed a real rapport. Their CTO, Michael, would often say, "You know, you understand our needs better than half of our internal team." Their CFO, Rebecca, started inviting me to strategic planning sessions that were typically closed to consultants. I was becoming part of their team while still technically working for Meridian. Fast forward to 3 months ago. We were in the final stages of contract negotiation. The paperwork was being prepared, and the deal was set to close in exactly 17 days. My bonus would be paid out in the next quarterly cycle after the contract was signed. I could almost feel that money in my account. That's when I noticed something odd. I was suddenly being excluded from internal meetings at Meridian about the Cross-Stream account. My emails to our legal team about the contract details went unanswered. Then I was told that Daniel, one of the managing partners, would be joining the final client meeting, just to ensure a smooth closing process. I'd seen this before. Senior management swooping in at the last minute to take credit for a junior employee's work. It's an unpleasant but common practice in consulting, but I wasn't that worried about Daniel taking some of the spotlight. The bonus was contractual, not discretionary. As long as the deal closed, I'd get my money. The day before the big final meeting with Cross-Stream, I got a calendar invite for a 9 a.m. meeting with HR and my direct supervisor, Janet. If you've ever received one of those unexpected HR meeting invites, you know exactly what it feels like having a stone drop in your stomach. I barely slept that night. I reviewed my performance metrics, client feedback, recent interactions with management, looking for any sign of what might be coming. Everything seemed positive on paper. My last performance review had been stellar. I couldn't figure out what the meeting could be about, other than perhaps some reorganization that would affect my team. The next morning, I arrived early, dressed in my best suit, the one I'd been saving for the cross-stream contract signing. Janet was already in the conference room with Melissa from HR when I arrived. Their faces told me everything I needed to know before a word was spoken. "We've decided to go in a different direction with your position," Janet began, not quite meeting my eyes. "Meridian is restructuring the fintech division, and your role is being eliminated, effective immediately." I sat there, stunned into silence, as Melissa slid a folder across the table containing my severance package. 6 weeks' pay, contingent on signing a non-disparagement agreement. No mention of the bonus. "What about the cross-stream deal?" I finally managed to ask. "We're signing tomorrow." Janet shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Daniel will be handling the closing process. The company appreciates all your work in bringing this client on board." "And my bonus?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Unfortunately," Melissa interjected with practiced sympathy, "as you won't be an employee when the contract is officially signed, you won't be eligible for the performance bonus." It was so transparent, it was almost comical. They had waited until the last possible moment to let me go, just to avoid paying out the bonus that I had earned. 3 years of loyalty, 8 months of round-the-clock work on this specific client, all erased with a different direction euphemism. I was escorted back to my desk to collect my personal items, with Janet awkwardly hovering nearby as if I might steal office supplies or download confidential files. My access to the company systems was already revoked. I couldn't even say goodbye to my team or send a final email to clients I'd been working with for years. As I was packing up my desk, I noticed my personal notebook where I'd kept detailed notes on the cross-stream implementation. It wasn't company property. I'd bought it myself and used it for my own reference. I slipped it into my bag, along with the framed photo of my dog and the fancy pen my grandfather had given me when I graduated. I walked out of that building in a daze. It was just past 10 a.m. and I had nowhere to be. The cross-stream meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. the next day, a meeting I had arranged for a client I had nurtured to sign a contract I had negotiated that would have secured my financial future. I sat in my car in the parking garage for almost an hour, cycling through shock, anger, and disbelief. Then my phone buzzed. It was Michael, the CTO from CrossStream. "Hey, just checking in about tomorrow's meeting. Wanted to go over a couple of technical points before we sign." I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Meridian hadn't yet informed CrossStream that I was no longer with the company. The ethical thing would be to direct Michael to Daniel, or someone else at Meridian. But then I thought about what Meridian had just done to me, about the $360,000 they had deliberately cheated me out of, about the surgery I'd postponed, the family events I'd missed, the sleepless nights I'd endured, all for a company that had discarded me the moment it became financially convenient. "Actually, Michael, something's come up. Can we meet for coffee today instead?" I replied. We met at a quiet cafe, halfway between his office and my now former workplace. I was still wearing my suit, though I'd loosened the tie and probably looked as shell-shocked as I felt. "You look like you've had a rough morning," Michael said as he sat down across from me. "You could say that," I replied, and then decided to just be direct. "Meridian terminated my position this morning, effective immediately." Michael's eyebrows shot up. "What? Why?" "The implementation is going perfectly. Officially, they're restructuring. Unofficially..." I hesitated, not wanting to sound bitter or unprofessional. "The timing is interesting. If they let me go after you sign tomorrow, they'd owe me a substantial performance bonus." Michael's expression darkened. He'd been in business long enough to understand exactly what had happened. "So who's handling our account now?" "Daniel Harrington. He's a managing partner, good at the high-level strategy, but he doesn't know the technical details of your implementation. He wasn't involved in any of the planning." Michael was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "You know," he finally said, "we're signing with Meridian because of you. The board was impressed with your understanding of our needs, your technical expertise, and the implementation plan you designed. I appreciated the vote of confidence, but it didn't change my situation. Thank you, but the contract is with Meridian, not with me personally." "Actually," Michael said, leaning forward, "we haven't signed anything yet, and contracts can be renegotiated right up until the signatures are dry." I looked at him, not quite understanding what he was suggesting. "Crossstream has been considering building an in-house consulting team for our European expansion," he continued. "We were going to wait until next year, but plans can be accelerated." My heart started racing as I realized what he was proposing. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm suggesting that instead of paying Meridian $2.4 million to loan us your expertise, we could bring you on directly as our Director of Implementation Strategy, with a signing bonus that reflects the value you bring to our company." I barely slept again that night, but for entirely different reasons. Michael and I had spent hours discussing possibilities, and he'd arranged an emergency meeting with Rebecca, the CFO, and their CEO, Jonathan. By midnight, I had a formal offer letter in my email, a 2-year contract with Crossstream as their Director of Implementation Strategy, at a salary 40% higher than what I'd been making at Meridian, plus a signing bonus of $250,000. Not quite the $360,000 I would have received, but substantial nonetheless, and without having to share it with Meridian. The next morning, Daniel Harrington arrived at Crossstream's offices for what he thought would be a contract signing. Instead, he was met by Michael, Rebecca, and Jonathan, who informed him that Crossstream had decided to take their implementation strategy in a different direction. The irony of the phrasing wasn't lost on me when Michael recounted the meeting later. Apparently, Daniel had been blindsided. He'd attempted to salvage the situation, offering to assign another experienced consultant, promising priority service, even suggesting a discount on the contract value. Which was ironic, considering they'd fired me to avoid paying out a percentage of that same amount. But Crossstream had made their decision. They weren't just hiring me. They were building the in-house team I'd originally suggested during our early consultations, a recommendation that Meridian had dismissed as not being in their business interest. Crossstream saw the value in that approach now, especially with me leading the implementation. The fallout was swift and dramatic. Daniel had called me within hours of leaving the Crossstream offices, his tone oscillating between threats and desperate bargaining. He implied that I had violated non-compete clauses. I hadn't. I'd reviewed my contract carefully. That I had stolen proprietary information. Also false. My implementation plan was my own work. And finally, that Meridian might reconsider my termination if I helped salvage the Crossstream relationship. "I appreciate the offer," I told him, savoring the moment perhaps more than I should have. "But I've decided to go in a different direction with my career." 2 days later, I received a formal letter from Meridian's legal department, demanding I return all company property and refrain from contacting Meridian clients. I responded with a letter from Crossstream's legal team, clarifying that I had been hired for my expertise, not for any client relationships, and reminding Meridian that they had terminated my employment without cause just before a major client signing, which could be interpreted as an attempt to deprive me of earned compensation, a point that could become relevant if they pursued legal action. They backed off after that. Starting at Crossstream was like stepping into an alternate reality. Instead of being a consultant brought in to solve a specific problem and then move on, I was now part of the leadership team, building something lasting. My implementation plan, which would have taken 18 months to execute under Meridian's framework, was completed in just 11 months with the dedicated in-house team we assembled. The European expansion exceeded all projections. We established operations in 6 countries instead of the originally planned 4, and our payment processing system set new industry standards for security and efficiency. I was given equity in the company as a performance reward, something that would never have happened at Meridian. But the most satisfying moment came about 7 months into my new role. CrossStream hosted a financial technology conference in London, and I was scheduled to speak about our successful European implementation. As I was reviewing my presentation in the green room, I looked up to see Janet, my former supervisor from Meridian, standing in the doorway. She looked uncomfortable, clearly not expecting to see me there. "I didn't realize you were speaking at this event," she said stiffly. "Director of Implementation Strategy," I replied, gesturing to my name badge. "It's part of the job description." There was an awkward pause before she spoke again. "You know, what happened at Meridian, it wasn't personal. It was a business decision." I could have responded in many ways. I could have told her how that business decision had nearly derailed my life plans. I could have pointed out that Meridian's client portfolio had contracted by 15% since I left, according to industry reports. I could have mentioned that 3 other top consultants had followed me to CrossStream in the past few months. Instead, I just smiled. "You're right, Janet. It was just business, and so was this." I gestured around at the CrossStream branded conference. "I made a business decision too." I walked past her to the stage, where I was introduced as the architect of CrossStream's record-breaking European expansion. As I looked out at the audience, I spotted Daniel sitting near the back, taking notes on what his firm had lost. It's been just over 2 years since that day in the HR conference room when my world seemed to collapse. Looking back, getting fired was the best thing that could have happened to me. Not because it was fair, it wasn't. Not because I didn't suffer, I did. But because it forced me out of a system that would never have valued my contribution appropriately. At CrossStream, I've now been promoted to Chief Integration Officer, overseeing our expansion into Asia. My equity in the company is worth substantially more than that bonus would have been. I finally got that shoulder surgery, bought a house by the lake, and even adopted a second dog to keep my first one company when I travel. But the most valuable thing I gained wasn't financial. It was the realization that my worth wasn't determined by a company like Meridian, that the relationships I build, the expertise I develop, and the value I create are mine, not my employer's. If you're in a similar situation, undervalued, overlooked, or worried that the company you've given everything to might discard you the moment it becomes convenient, remember this: your skills, your client relationships, your reputation, and your ideas are yours. Companies may try to claim ownership of them, but at the end of the day, they live in you. Sometimes, the most powerful negotiating position is being willing to walk away, or in my case, being pushed out and taking the very thing they wanted most. Was it petty of me to enjoy watching Meridian lose their biggest potential client? Maybe a little. Do I regret it? Not for a second. Some might say the professional thing would have been to accept my termination gracefully and move on without interfering with Meridian's client relationship. But I believe that true professionalism means standing up for your worth and refusing to be exploited. CrossStream didn't hire me because I convinced them to abandon Meridian. They hired me because I had consistently demonstrated my value to them over months of close collaboration. The relationship I built with them was genuine, based on trust and delivered results. Meridian thought they could separate me from that relationship and keep the profits for themselves. They were wrong. If there's one lesson I hope you take from my story, it's this: invest in yourself and your relationships first, not in a company that sees you as replaceable. Build your skills, nurture your professional network, and always know your worth. That way, if you ever find yourself suddenly going in a different direction, you'll have options. And if you ever find yourself in a position to choose between loyalty to a company that has shown you none and looking out for your own best interests, well, I think you know where I stand on that. Before I wrap up this video, I want to address something important. Some viewers might be wondering about the ethics or legality of what I did. Was I stealing a client? Was I violating some business code? Here's the reality. I didn't reach out to CrossStream after being terminated. They were already in contact with me about the project. I didn't misrepresent anything to them. I was honest about my situation. I didn't take any proprietary Meridian methodologies or tools. The implementation plan was my own intellectual creation. What I did was accept a job offer from a company that valued my skills at a time when my previous employer had made it clear they did not. That's not just legal, it's the very foundation of how the job market is supposed to work. Companies often try to convince employees that loyalty should flow upward, but rarely demonstrate that loyalty flows downward as well. They include non-compete clauses and non-solicitation agreements in contracts, creating the impression that taking your talents elsewhere is somehow unethical or even illegal. But remember this. In most cases, these restrictions have limitations and may not even be enforceable, depending on your location and the specific circumstances. Always consult with a legal professional about your particular situation, but don't assume that a paragraph in your employment contract can prevent you from building a career on your own terms. My journey from being fired before my bonus to becoming a C-level executive at a thriving company isn't just about revenge or getting even. It's about recognizing my own value in the marketplace and refusing to let one company's short-sighted decision define my career trajectory. So if you're watching this while feeling stuck, underappreciated, or worried about your future at your current company, take a deep breath. Start building your network outside your organization. Document your achievements. Develop skills that belong to you, not your employer. And remember that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can lead to the best opportunity you never knew you wanted. Thanks for watching this far. If my story resonated with you or you've had similar experiences, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. And if you found value in what I've shared today, please consider subscribing to my channel for more insights on navigating career challenges, building professional relationships, and creating success on your own terms. Until next time, know your worth and never settle for less.